The fluorescent lights hummed with a sharp, electric buzz that vibrated against Cindy's teeth. She stood in aisle 4, staring at a shelf of canned goods she could not afford. Her fingers pressed into the stolen loaf of bread and the block of cheese hidden against her ribs. The items felt like lead weights, dragging her posture down, pulling at her muscles with every shallow breath she took. She thought of Vuyo and Sneh. They were waiting on the damp mattress at home, their breathing thin and ragged from 3 days of nothing but water. She had to move. Cindy took a step, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum. The sound was too loud, too sharp in the quiet aisle. She stopped, waited for a reaction from the other shoppers, but no one turned. She adjusted the weight of the bread, feeling the crust dig into her side. She turned toward the front of the store, her pace quickening. The air grew cooler as she neared the entrance. The automatic sliding doors loomed ahead, a gateway to the street. She reached the threshold, her hand hovering near the glass, her pulse hammering against her throat. She was inches from the exit. She stepped forward, ready to break into a run, but the sensors remained dark. The doors did not slide open. Cindy waved her hand in front of the glass. Once, twice, then frantically. The sensors remained dead, a black eye in the frame of the door. She pushed against the glass with her shoulder, but it held firm, a solid wall of resistance. Panic flared, hot and sudden. She turned to retreat into the aisles, but a heavy hand slammed onto her shoulder, fingers digging into the muscle and bone. The force spun her around, throwing her off balance. Mr. Govinder stood over her, his face tight, his radio clipped to his belt. His eyes locked onto the unnatural bulge beneath her coat. "Going somewhere, Cece," he barked, the sound cutting through the store's hum. He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising, and shoved her backward. She stumbled, her feet sliding on the slick floor, until she hit the center of the main aisle. The movement drew eyes. A woman pushing a cart stopped, then another. The shoppers drifted in from the produce section, their footsteps rhythmic and slow. They formed a tight, silent circle around her. Cindy felt the air vanish from the space. She was pinned by the weight of their stares, the manager standing between her and the exit. Cindy felt the circle of shoppers tightening, their collective gaze heavy and suffocating. She looked at Mr. Govinder, then down at the bulge beneath her side. With hands that shook violently, she reached in and pulled out the loaf of bread. She held it out, her palms open and trembling, presenting the stolen item like a fragile offering. The plastic packaging crinkled in the silence. She looked up, her eyes wet and wide. "My children are starving," she whispered, the words barely cutting through the low, constant hum of the freezer units. She took a half step forward, her knees knocking together. "I will scrub your floors for a month, every night. I will clean the aisles, the windows, the storage room. Just let me take this to them." She held the bread out further, her arms straining with the effort of keeping them steady. She waited for a reaction, her breath hitching in her chest. The manager did not blink. She dropped her gaze to the linoleum, her fingers curling into the crust of the bread, desperate for any sign of mercy. Mr. Govinder did not look at the bread. He pulled a clipboard from his side, his thumb tracing a line of text as he scanned the inventory list. The silence in the aisle stretched, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of the store's overhead cooling system. "If I let you go, everyone in the township will come here to steal," he said, his voice flat and projecting toward the back of the store. "My store is not a charity. It is a business." A woman standing near the cereal shelves stepped forward, her hand gripping the handle of her cart. "It is just bread," she shouted, her voice sharp with sudden indignation. "She is a mother. Let her go." The manager did not turn his head toward the woman. He signaled to the security guard standing by the entrance. The guard shifted his weight, his boots thudding against the floor as he moved to block the path. The manager looked back at Cindy, his jaw set. "Rules are the only thing keeping this place running," he stated, his tone devoid of any hesitation. The crowd murmured, a low, discordant sound. Cindy let the bread slip from her grip, the plastic hitting the floor with a soft thud. She collapsed, her knees striking the hard linoleum with a sharp, jarring impact. The cold floor seeped through her skin, but she did not flinch. She reached out, her hands trembling as she gripped the hem of the manager's trousers, pulling herself closer to his feet. "Please, Baba," she rasped, her voice cracking. "If I go to jail, they will be left alone. They are only children. They have had nothing for 3 days." Tears spilled from her eyes, hitting the floor and leaving dark, wet spots on the fabric of his pants. She looked up, her face a mask of raw, unfiltered agony, searching his eyes for a flicker of humanity. The manager stood rigid, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, refusing to acknowledge the woman at his feet. He shifted his weight, his jaw tightening until the muscles stood out. With a sudden, sharp movement, he kicked his leg free, tearing the fabric from her grasp. He stepped back, his face twisted in a sneer of pure disgust. He did not look down. He simply adjusted his stance, his posture radiating a cold, clinical indifference that silenced the remaining murmurs in the aisle. Mr. Govender did not pause to watch her scramble back. He reached for the radio clipped to his side, his thumb pressing the button with a sharp, mechanical click. The device crackled, a harsh, static-filled sound that echoed against the high ceiling of the store like a gunshot. "Security, lock the front doors," he commanded, his voice steady and devoid of empathy. "Call the SAPs. We have a shoplifter in custody." The radio emitted a high-pitched whine before settling into a low, rhythmic hum. Cindy remained on the floor, her hands pressed against the cold tiles, listening to the finality of his words. Outside the glass storefront, the darkness of the evening was suddenly pierced by rhythmic flashes of blue and red. The light pulsed against the display windows, casting long, shifting shadows that swept across the linoleum floor. The sound of a heavy engine idling grew louder, vibrating through the glass. Tires crunched against the gravel of the parking lot. The police van had arrived. Cindy stared at the entrance, watching the reflections of the emergency lights dance on the floor. She stood up slowly, her movements stiff, her eyes fixed on the glass doors. Cindy rose, but the tremor in her limbs vanished. Her posture straightened, fluid and precise, as if she were shedding a heavy weight. She ignored the approaching officers, her gaze locking onto the space between the aisles. She reached into her pocket, fingers closing around a small, beaded string. She pulled it out, the beads clicking softly against one another. Then she began to hum. It was not a song, but a low, guttural vibration that started deep in her chest. The sound did not merely travel through the air. It pushed against the eardrums of everyone nearby. The hum grew, rhythmic and insistent, causing the metal shelves to rattle. A sudden, biting chill swept through the supermarket, turning the stale air into a swirling mist. Shoppers froze in place, their breath blooming in white clouds. The floor beneath their feet began to pulse, a steady, rhythmic thrum that matched the cadence of her voice. Mr. Govender stepped forward, his mouth opening to shout. The air grew thick, heavy with an unseen pressure. The building itself seemed to groan, the foundations shuddering under the weight of an impossible rising power. The air reached a breaking point. A deafening pop cracked through the store, followed instantly by a cascade of shattering glass. Overhead, the fluorescent tubes exploded one by one, showering the aisles in sparks and shards. The store plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The hum stopped. The only sound left was the frantic, rhythmic clicking of metal as the police officers drew their weapons and activated their flashlights. Beams of white light cut through the black, sweeping across the floor, catching the dust motes and the scattered debris of the broken bulbs. The officers moved in tight, jagged patterns, their boots crunching over the glass. They shouted commands into the void, but the store swallowed their voices. The flashlights darted over the shelves, the checkout counters, and the floor where Cindy had been kneeling. The light revealed nothing but empty space. The officers converged on the center of the aisle, their beams crossing and recrossing the spot. They stopped, their movements slowing. The store was silent. The emergency red lights flickered, casting a dim, pulsing glow over the aisles. The officers stood frozen, their flashlights now redundant against the crimson hue. In the center of the aisle, the loaf of bread lay abandoned on the linoleum, untouched and perfectly preserved. Where Cindy had been kneeling just moments before, there was no sign of a struggle, no footprints, and no lingering heat. Instead, A small, perfectly formed pile of red dust rested on the floor, glowing faintly in the emergency light. Mr. Govender stepped forward, his boots scuffing the glass, and stared down at the mound of powder. The heavy, suffocating pressure that had gripped the store vanished, replaced by the mundane, rhythmic hum of the freezers restarting. The officers lowered their weapons, their faces tight with confusion as they scanned the empty corners of the store. There was no exit, no hidden door, and no way for anyone to have crossed the perimeter unnoticed. Then, from somewhere far beyond the concrete walls in the parking lot, the sound drifted in. It was clear, bright, and unmistakably joyful. The laughter continued for a long moment, drifting further away until it faded into the night, leaving the store behind in the quiet, red-lit stillness.